Before we dive in, I really want to frame today's conversation for our listeners. The episode is not just about hype cycles or price charts, it's about power markets, compute demand, grid constraints, and why Bitcoin is increasingly relevant to national resilience. Lisa, you live in the weeds of this world every single day, and that perspective is so rare. So let's start at the beginning. You spent over a decade at trading physical and financial natural gas, structuring complex deals, and managing volatility at scale. So what pulled you out of traditional trading and into Bitcoin? Was it the single moment, or was it the slow realization of something fundamental that was changing?
Yeah, it was probably a slow burn into Bitcoin as I was figuring out that post huge life change that I wasn't going to have enough money to live the rest of my life, and I was going to have to go back to work. My career was in energy trading. It was a million years ago, and funnily enough, I have Enron on my resume, which is actually like having resume gold. It's like in the banking community, if you have Goldman Sachs, people think that's really cool. I have Enron on my resume, and actually, I think that almost every company in the energy space that I worked for went out of business. Some of those folks are served time. It was a really interesting community of people. But my last role was at PG&E Energy Trading. It was called the National Energy Group. We were their non-regulated speculative trading desk, but we had ties to the supply of gas for about 4,500 megawatts. So I ran our East Coast trading, all physical and financial spec trading, as well as supplying three big power plants up in New England. What I learned from that and what I took from that is that you don't make money in the energy space by trading, put your finger in the air, like is it going higher or lower? It's all about how do you optimize assets that you have under management or assets that you're familiar with, and it's collecting all of these data points. What's the weather like? What are the counterparty risks? What are the physical, perhaps plant or pipeline constraints? You take all of those things into consideration, in real time every day, and you decide how to best use that information to make money. So I went through this big kind of life-changing event in 2019, 2020, and went, God, I'm going to have to go back to work. What do I really want to do? And over the last 6 years or 7 years, I've talked to so many, specifically women, who have said, gosh, my kids grew up, they went to college or they're out of college. What am I supposed to do now? And I always say the same thing, like, what do you want to talk about? What do you find yourself talking about? Like, what kind of books do you like to read? What documentaries do you watch? Like, what's of interest to you? And what was of interest to me was all of this new technology. So having been a trader for a long time, and specifically a commodities trader, where you are collecting all sorts of physical infrastructure data points, etc., I started trading equities, like new technologies. So I was trading NVIDIA, Snowflake, the trade desk. I was really looking for, where is the market going to go? Tesla, how will robotics, autonomous vehicles, genomics, how will these things affect us in the future, and who are the market leaders? Long way of saying, I'm also very lazy. And once I figured out that Bitcoin was really a pure play energy type technology, I just decided to quit spec trading all of those equities and really dive into, how am I going to connect the energy companies to the Bitcoin world? Because when you understand that energy is, the foundation of everything good in our country is downstream of energy. Our ability to produce, to transfer, to ship, everything provides, us the ability to live the great lives that we live here in America. So I started talking to energy companies, basically pitching them on not Bitcoin as an investment, but let's just say that you're a power plant operator. There's a company called Calpine. And I went to Calpine and said, how much of the time do you have power that you can't sell on the open market? Like, what sort of market forces are at play? And I think they threw out a number that was like 4% of the time they pay to have their excess power absorbed into the grid system because it's more economic for them to pay that 4% of the time than to shut a plant down and bring a plant back up. So I started thinking, gosh, if it's 4% of the time, that's not insignificant. What if they set up Bitcoin miners on site and the Bitcoin miners absorbed the power during that time period? And I just could never get that message to really land, even though I was speaking with their very senior leadership. Having worked in energy, I grew up in Houston. The heads of all the energy companies either coached a soccer team my daughter was on, or we lived in their neighborhood, or perhaps maybe we belong to the same club. I mean, it's a really small community. But at the time, again, this was like 2019, 2020, Elizabeth Warren's narrative around Bitcoin is for terrorists. Anybody who touches Bitcoin is going to serve a life sentence in prison. I'm not saying she said that, but I'm sure she was thinking it. That sort of malware programming that was constantly on the news was prohibiting. And still to this day, I had a call with a big energy company a week ago today. The same thing, although this energy company I talked to a week ago said, well, we're going to finally start mining Bitcoin, but we don't want anyone to know we're doing it. And that's just absolutely batshit crazy because, Bitcoin is like the second phase of the American Revolution. The American Revolution was about unalienable rights for every human. Bitcoin is the only money that can be used. It's the only property that can be held by every human on earth, regardless of property rights. I found myself really entrenched in the energy world again and connecting them with the Bitcoin miners. And while I was doing that, I also joined, I've worked at 3 different financial service companies, including Fidelity, but I started at Unchained and I went and worked at Custodia Bank with Caitlin Long until she lost the lawsuit against the Federal Reserve. They didn't want to give her a banking license, and was most recently at Fidelity. But my interest really lies in continuing to build these alliances between the energy teams and the Bitcoin companies. Now, what we're seeing, and I'm sorry to ramble, I'll promise I'm drawing to a close here. But the Bitcoin mining groups that identified these large chunks of power in these sites are obviously they're first duteous to their shareholders or their stakeholders, and they're all moving over into the HPC world, selling their power for 10 cents a kilowatt versus mining Bitcoin maybe at 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt. So I have a business partner. He and I are deeply ingrained in bringing these energy companies to the data center builders and to the AI companies. That's just, it was a completely unplanned, happy accident that's what we sort of wound up doing. But our first site was announced. It's out in West Texas. It's a huge deal. Poolside is the AI tenant. It's called Project Horizon, but they're looking at building 2 gigawatts out in West Texas. And when we talk about data centers, I think the most misunderstood thing for perhaps folks in the United States is that if you have a data center in your town, you also, that everything good is downstream of a data center in your town, right? You're going to have a new library, new fire trucks, all of the revenue that gets paid to the state or to the local, the local community, has huge effect on those communities. So when we talk about, kind of the disintegration of America or what's happened to the American middle class, I mean, nothing will revive the American middle class like a data center in your town. You want that. Mayors in America should be fighting to bring data centers to their town.
I agree. And it's funny. I wanted to ask you what you think people might misunderstand over overlooked power or different energy assets. And so now I'm seeing that your current work sits at the intersection of power markets, hyperscale compute demand, and national security. So why is compute now an energy problem, and why is energy now a security issue?
I mean, it's national security. National security is 3 things. It's economic prosperity, right? So resources for towns. It's what we talked about. It's communities, it's fire stations, it's libraries, It's soccer teams, soccer fields, right? Economic prosperity local to Americans is the one of the three sort of pillars of national security. So economic security, diplomacy. We must have good relationships with our allies outside of the United States. And also, obviously, for national security, most people probably think of the military. Military should be our absolute last option, right? You hopefully build good things in your country so that people have access to good schools, they have hope, they have, they want to build families, have children, stay in their local communities, maybe become the mayor of their community. That's really your first defense. You don't want a weak society inside of a nation. You want people who are filled with, this like inner hope and ambition and drive and grit, and we can go do good things. People have to understand what it is that they're working towards. So when you consider what a data center is, it's really just a central brain for, everything that you will touch. The first website that really went live, consumer facing website, which everyone scoffed at and thought it was the dumbest idea ever, was the Pizza Hut website. And it's still out there. If you Google the first Pizza Hut, you'll see this like super pedantic website, but you could go online and you could order a pizza. And everyone thought that was absolutely ridiculous. Why would we ever do that? Right. And now like people have the Domino's tracker on their phone and they're tracking their pizza to them. But data centers are just the central intelligence brain for every company. So as we continue to build things, whether it's your local hospital, your local fire department. I mean, one great podcast that people should watch is really early. It's not a podcast actually; it's an interview. It's a Jack Dorsey is on stage. I think he's at Stanford. It might be like 12 years ago or 14 years ago. But he's talking about how he was watching in St. Louis the dispatch for 911 dispatch, and all that he's collecting all these dots, and then however many years later, he builds Twitter. So a data center is your central intelligence brain in your community. It's not something far-flung that you don't touch. It's so that you can order your Domino's pizza, etc. The number of people coming to the data center is increasing. What we hear most about are these AI groups that are coming that, who knows what it is that they're constructing and so who their customers are. But, maybe Palantir is a client, but maybe it's the local hospital. Maybe it's an American pharmaceutical company who's trying to solve for a genomics issue. Maybe it's the brain for a company that's building, robotic vacuum cleaners. I mean, I don't know. It's an endless, hopefully, endless growth cycle in the United States. But you got to have a data center. You've got to have a place to plug these things in to let these computers run. And unlike what people say, it's not. It's perhaps in the short term will cause prices to go up to the consumer for their power, but in the long term, it should really bring consumer prices down, because what's happening and what we see, what I'm working on, is building out new generation at these sites, and then eventually that new generation will get plugged into the grid. So, in the very short term, these companies are trying to plug in and find a place to start running their computers. But that game is really pretty much over. They're everywhere that you can plug in, it has been plugged in. What we're building now are these micro sort of power plants, and hopefully attracting capital to so for large new power plants can be built. And it's really interesting because the financing for Bitcoin was always just very challenging, right? Again, it was sort of the Elizabeth Warren narrative that carried over. That's, or the Jamie Dimon narrative. Although JP Morgan, I think, was behind, I think they were in the initial raised for cipher mining. So you had Jamie on one side saying Bitcoin's horrible, and then his bank is, you know, but on the HPC side, I mean, if you've got a Microsoft behind you or a Google, you can borrow copious amounts of money. The capital markets are supporting those efforts. So with the capital market support, again, I mean, it all boils down to, I always ask when I look at opportunities, what are we actually trying to do? Like, to me, I'm not actually trying to build a data center. What I work for is wealth for every American, private property rights for every American. And when we build data centers, we're building opportunity for communities. Hopefully we all have kids and our kids have kids, and America becomes this sort of beautiful 1950s image that we see where people are out in their front yards and neighbors are friendly with one another, right? Like, that's, to me, that's what we're working for.
And I could just imagine there's probably a lot of surface level debate between Bitcoin and energy. So, from an operator's perspective, how does Bitcoin mining actually function as a grid stabilizing or resilience tool when done correctly?
Well, I think Bitcoin miners will be in every, well, let's take it in two pieces. First of all, I think they'll be in every data center because data centers, depending on what's in them, that you might have heard that, they want this 5 nines. They want the reliability 99.999% of the time, right? They want uptime because their computers have to work all the time. They want near perfect uptime. But in reality, they're not using 100% uptime. What you're trying to do is match the supply with the demand for power. So especially, well, in both on grid and off grid, but definitely on the grid. I mean, that's why Calpine was paying 4% of the time, just to they wanted just to keep their plants running and let the grid be the stabilizer. That's why they would basically give their power away for free or pay to have it taken. In the data center world, you want the balance. Energy, electrons are like water flowing, high pressure water all the time. You want that. You can't have electrons that have a bunch of variance. It's terrible for the grid. It's destructive to the computers, etc. So, but within the energy teams, there's an incredible amount of opportunity for you name it, public and private energy companies to look at their own assets and decide, gosh, we should be plugging in Bitcoin miners here. I mean, have really good relationship with a big private energy company in Texas and have worked with them looking at stuff on the north slope of Alaska, looking at things in New Mexico, looking at things in Texas, where they're facing, all sorts of regulatory components where, they can't flare gas. But for this one company I'm speaking of in particular, they've got oil and gas coming out of the ground. There's a pipeline to take the oil, not a pipeline to take the gas. So they can either flare it or they can perhaps have another company come in and compress it and then truck it away, right? That's a lot of people moving around a well pad site. If you've got a compression team that's coming in with huge trucks, much easier to build a Bitcoin mining site and take that gas, run it to a generator, use the generator to produce electricity, have shipping containers or a small building, put the miners in them and mine Bitcoin. Right? It's like a portable pipeline for the energy companies. And they've been slow to do that. They'd rather, my partner, Dan, and I worked with a company that was in different company that was in Alaska and got very close to building out a Bitcoin mining site there. And the company just couldn't get their brains wrapped around, Bitcoin is another energy commodity like gas, like oil, like propane. They couldn't get their minds wrapped around it. And then we saw about 3 or 4 or 5 months later, they paid some huge fee because they just started, like, hundreds of thousands of dollars because they just were flaring their gas in violation of the air standards in Alaska.
Missed opportunity.
Right. I blame Elizabeth Warren for that.
And you know what? I actually do want to talk about policy and the disconnect between operational reality. And I feel like because of your work that you've had through Bitcoin Today Coalition and a bunch of these other companies that you've worked with, what can you tell us a little bit about that disconnect? What worries you about decisions that are being made without infrastructure fluency?
I know. I love that you said that. I have to steal that from you, infrastructure fluency. Um, well, there's like that meme on Twitter, like Bitcoin is everything that you don't know about energy and computer science and cryptography or whatever, like all boiled into one. I mean, I think most people just generally don't understand. Uh, they don't understand energy. They don't understand how the fairies behind their walls, make so that when I hit the switch on my wall, the power comes on. Like they think that that's magic. The truth is that you've got really smart people putting enormous amounts of capital to work, and in many cases in very uncomfortable places within the United States, to make that magic happen. And you know we've got to get away from this ESG narrative. I was in Houston recently, and I was driving out I-10, the huge highway that goes east-west. I was driving west right about the Beltway, and there's this, I mean, like, I don't know how long, I mean, just this huge banner kind of along a fence line, and it says, Houston will be green by 2030. And I just, like, that to me is so offensive and stupid. I mean, you don't want Houston to be green by 2030. Let's just all agree that we don't want polluted air and we don't want polluted water. But um, when we continue to introduce renewables into our grid, we introduce instability, right? It's the wind and solar that produce the most variability within the grid. And you're seeing in the PJM market, which is like the middle of the country, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, et cetera, like they took 20 coal plants offline in the last 10 years, and they wonder why their power prices continue to double almost annually. They took, I'll just repeat that. They took 20 coal plants offline in the last 10 years, and they're mad because their power prices are going up. You took the cheapest thermal source in the world and you built wind and solar, not which is not one for one. And you don't know why your power prices are going up, because prices go up because people need stability. So and I think, I mean, Trump is, I mean, they've just done they're doing incredible things. I mean, I'm speaking with the Department of Energy regularly. Um, I've got some friends that are part of that team. I mean, they're doing incredible work to support, really redefining prosperity for every American by way of, uh, careful infrastructure planning in the energy space.
That's amazing that you're working with the Department of Energy, but I also know you've worked with institutional allocators, venture capital, family offices, corporate treasurers, different companies around the world. Why does capital still struggle to understand energy-backed Bitcoin infrastructure, and what finally convinces serious capital to move?
Well, I mean, I think, hat tip to BlackRock. I do speak to all those folks. I speak to everybody, Jessica, I mean,
I love that. I do know, and I love that about you. And I feel like that's why you are so knowledgeable, is because you just take in everything that's around you, and then you're able to analyze it in a different way that most people can't. And then to put it even further, then you're able to carefully articulate it to people like me, or our audience that doesn't necessarily know a lot about energy, or maybe they don't know a lot about Bitcoin, but yet we're able to understand it through you. So my hat is off to you, while your hat is off to the BlackRock and whomever else.
it's reputational, it's career risk still for so many. I mean, I'm super frustrated because I'm close to a family in Houston. I'm going to phrase this without trying to give away who it is, because I don't ever name names when people share really personal information with me. But um, there's a really, really wealthy family in Houston. Their names are on a lot of the buildings, and the patriarch passed away a number of years ago. And his son and I just met recently, and learned that we actually were neighbors. We didn't realize we were neighbors when we were neighbors like a decade ago. But his son and I met through a wealth manager in Houston. Said this gentleman's trying to get into the data center space and understand the HPC, et cetera. And so our mutual friend said, you should talk to Lisa. Of course, so I say, oh, I'd love to. Come to find out, the patriarch had gone to the family. They apparently used to have a family meeting every Wednesday. They'd have lunch and they'd have a family meeting and they'd discuss investments. And so the patriarch goes to them and says, you know, so I've identified two things I want to potentially invest in. One is Bitcoin, and the other is like this plastics company or something. And so the family sits around the table, and the patriarch says, I really want to invest in this thing called Bitcoin. Like, I don't know what it is, but it seems like it's gold, and I want to invest. This would be my vote. But they took a vote, and the family decided to invest in the plastics company. Okay, well, that was 10 years ago. So the son, now he and I are, we have like 3 different lunches, and I'm trying to really bring him up to speed on the data center space and kind of Bitcoin all wrapped in one conversation. And he tells me this story, and he says, I really think that we should be allocating. They've got a big investment team now. They've got a professional investment team. I really think we should be allocating to Bitcoin. Can you talk to my investment team? Sure, introduce me. So, we get on the phone, I have a call with their investment team, and the guy that runs the group, like, you can picture him. He's like in a button down shirt with a navy blue vest. He's like 40. And he's like, I don't want to waste your time, but like, this isn't for us. We like dividend paying investments. Like, this isn't for us. And I'm like, I got it. I hear you. Do you know anything about strategy or stretch? STRC, like, look up these tickers, blah, 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 blah. And I give him kind of like a 1-minute pitch on stretch. And then I send him Larry Lepard's book, The Big Print. And I sent him a couple of Sailor talks on YouTube and send him some more info on stretch. Just like, hey, and like, I get nothing from this, right? I don't sell Bitcoin. I have nothing to sell. I don't charge for my time. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody. And I get a note back, and he's like, I really appreciate it all. This is not for us. And it's because I think, because they just don't have the cojones to step in and realize that this is phase 2 of the American Revolution. This is, private property rights for every human on earth. That's what Bitcoin is. And, they're not interested in supporting the ecosystem or building out this ecosystem. I think they're weak. I think it's laughable and embarrassing, and they're weak. And, the patriarch would have been 90 this year, and he grew up in a different world, right? He grew up in a world, I mean, he made his money in the energy business. He was a wildcatter. The guys today just want to, keep going to the country club, get their kids into the right ridiculous preschools, all the BS that they think is the way. It's not the way. The road is broken. The money is broken. The road is broken. We are building the new infrastructure today.
I'm going to touch on that because you're talking about the road being broken. And I want to talk about that on a broader level of how it's broken for pretty much every American when you look at it. So you've spoken publicly about the anxiety that you felt in traditional finance, the fear of instability despite professional success, and how Bitcoin changed that for you. What did Bitcoin give you that traditional financial systems could not?
I just don't trust anybody. And it's not a personal thing, but if you look at what I started looking at was, okay, let's say that I'm going to, I was trading a portfolio. I had about 30% in energy. So I had a portfolio manager. Let me just say that 2018, I switched portfolio managers and to somebody that I really thought I respected and trusted. And he had me in like 26 different mutual funds. And it was fine and everything, but I started digging into these different mutual funds and I realized, first of all, he's getting a fee. Each fund has a fee. And I'm a spreadsheet person. So I built this spreadsheet of where all the investments actually were. And it boiled down to basically 26 different ways to buy the S&P. And so I thought, well, this doesn't really make any sense. I mean, I can just buy the S&P myself if I want to own the S&P. And by the way, I really think I want to be heavy in energy. I want to be heavy in tech, kind of emerging tech, and I want to be allocated to Bitcoin, to crypto broadly, actually. In 2018, I was buying Ethereum and the other cryptos. And I told him that, and he said, first of all, you don't know what you're doing because, energy is 2% of the S&P. We're not going to have a 30 or 35% allocation to energy. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you're going to lose all your money. And, we had some unkind words, mostly because I don't really appreciate 65-year-old men that are telling me that I'm stupid and I'm going to lose all my own money. It's my money to lose if I want to. Thanks so much. And so he fired me and told me to close my accounts and move my assets, which I did. And I promptly went 35% into energy, 30% into kind of emerging tech, including NVIDIA. Back then you could day trade Amazon, Apple, the trade desk. I don't know. I had just a couple of handful, maybe 15 equities that I was sort of day trading. And then I allocated to crypto. And what I really started to dig into was, what's going to make a company successful? Well, obviously it's a good idea and it's a great management team. But if you look back over the last 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, the companies that were at the top of the S&P 30 years ago aren't even recognizable today. They're certainly not the top 10 companies. So, 30 years ago, it could have been Procter & Gamble, or it could have been Exxon, or it could have been, those things change. And I figured out that, Bitcoin is the most scarce asset on earth. And over time, I don't know what the timing is, but over time, it will be the most valuable asset on earth. There is no management team. There will be no Coldplay event, the concert. That will not happen and take the stock down. There won't be any sort of scandal, within the Bitcoin management team, because there isn't one. It's just the most scarce asset on earth. So I started, paring down my investments in other things and became just an absolute freaking zealot in Bitcoin. Really just in time for the whole market to crater.
That was a rough time. That was right before COVID hit, correct?
Well, it was like 2021 or something. I think it was after.
Oh, so before then, so after the COVID, when everything went up after COVID, it was during that crash. I got you.
Horrible.
But then think about the comeback since then.
I'm with Saylor. I mean, Saylor said, I'm holding this if it goes to zero. I'm with him. I'm holding it if it goes to zero. Like, I'm a buyer. I'm a buyer all the way down.
I love to hear that. I actually want to ask you about the spaces that you've operated in. You've operated senior levels in energy trading and Bitcoin. Both are two intensely male dominated spaces. And you've said publicly that being a woman in those rooms is actually an advantage. Can you tell us why that is?
I have a personality, like, people just like to tell me things. They like to share their, it's like I like to have warm, fuzzy conversations. First of all, I never share what people tell me with anyone else. I'm a vault. I also just really like to help people. And so if, that's the head of a public company that wants to go do business in the energy space, or, I get introduced to folks often where the person introducing says, Lisa knows everybody. You've got, if there's only one person to meet in Texas, you've got to meet Lisa. Like, I take that really seriously. Like, that's a lot of responsibility. And I just feel like if, I share everything I know with everybody who asks, good things will happen. Right? That's one of my favorite quotes from C.C. Chapman. Like, rule number 1, be a good human. Share everything you know with all who ask. If you do these things, good things. Work hard every day. If you do these things, good things will happen. I believe that. We have to build what we want. We have to build the communities that we want. And we're not building for ourselves. I'm not building for myself. I'm building for my grandchildren, for your grandchildren. It's important. Otherwise, we might as well just give up now. I mean, hopefully we as Americans aren't going to fight. Hopefully our generation won't go to war, but we're at war right now in an economic sense. We must build these things so that we have national security within our own borders, so that we have economic prosperity within our communities.
Absolutely. Lisa, you were talking about your daughter and granddaughters. I do want to touch on your daughter really quickly. She's remarkable. I'm going to let you talk about her because obviously you know her better than anyone on this earth, but everybody's going to want to tune into this. Tell us a little bit about your daughter and what she's working on.
Yeah, she's great.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
She's great. Well, she works at Strategy. She works for Michael Saylor, and she's on their treasury team. She just had we had a different path. She's been in like 7 schools or something. She lived in China her junior year of high school. She learned how to speak Mandarin in 100 days. I was the mom that always took her back to school late. We'd skip the first 2 weeks of school because in Houston it's hot and they go back to school like August the 15th. And we were never in Houston in the summer. We used to vacation with our family, had a house in the Northeast. And, she was in a sailboat sailing out in open water at like 5 years old, all by herself. When I tell people what I wanted for her, I wanted to be able to drop her anywhere in the world by herself and have her figure it out. Like, I think that's a success. I think by about the time you're 15, if your parents can't drop you off in a foreign country by yourself, you've probably done something wrong, because giving your kids confidence to make decisions, is a skill that they need more than anything that they'll learn in school. And, she was probably 7 or 8 and I was having her pay all of our family bills. Like, she'd open the mail, she'd review the bill. It'd be like the light bill or whatever, right? She'd get the checkbook, she'd make out the check and bring everything to one of us and we'd sign it, right? And then she'd put it in the mail. She wanted to go to camp for a month when she was like 9 years old. And I said, that's great, but you've got to, go on their website, print out all the material, fill out all the forms, make a list of everything you need. We're going to make one trip to Target to get what we need. You're going to need to pack your trunk. Like, I put it all on her. I was not going to be that mom that, was at the club going, oh my God, and then we've got to do this, and then we've got to do that. And I got to run in this for her. And I got to do this for her. Like, I never did that. It's your life. I'm right here if you need me, but you're going to take responsibility for every step of the way. And so, at 9, she filled out like I'm not even kidding you, like 40 pages of all the medical forms and this form and that. She actually went to Camp Mystic, where that horrible tragedy happened this year, where all those girls were lost. That was the camp. It was a really special place. And one of those girls is still missing, by the way. So, Ella has been able to be self-sustaining from a very early age. And, when she went to college, I mean, we never filled out one form for an admission. We didn't help in any way at all. We didn't write her essays for her. We did not, she did it all. So she's a great time manager. She's very smart. And if you believe in your kids, you act like a swim coach, not a lifeguard.
I love that too. And everybody does need to look her up online. I tell me if this is true. Did she lead the first Bitcoin degree program at her college? Is that correct?
Well, it's not a program, but she spent about 15 months convincing Cornell to let her major in Bitcoin. So she has the first degree in Bitcoin. Her diploma says Bitcoin. She has the first degree in Bitcoin at any school anywhere in the world.
That's amazing. That's a testament to your relationship with her as well. And I'm just excited to see her growth. I mean, she's so young and has her whole life ahead of her. So it's going to be exciting to just see everything that's going on. And then, okay, I do want to look ahead and zoom out a little bit across energy, compute, Bitcoin, geopolitics. What do you think people are dramatically underestimating about the next decade?
Well, I guess I would just touch on the race for power hasn't even started. There is no AI bubble. We're not even factoring in the amount of productivity that it will add to our society. I think it's accretive to each and every person. There's nothing to be afraid of. Get out there, figure out how to use these models, go on YouTube, take a class on prompting. It will help you whether you are a volunteer, you're writing thank you notes on behalf of an organization. It will help you if you're in the medical field, obviously doing research. It will help you if you're a patient in a hospital trying to figure out what your own problem is. I think this really gives people a chance to up-level their game, right? It certainly has made me better at so many of the tasks that either I just was too lazy to do or wasn't good at. It helps me think through things. I was having a conversation actually with Ella last night. I think their company is so misunderstood. I think strategy is undervalued and misunderstood, not financial advice, by the way. But, over time, I think strategy and their product stretch, it just becomes a consumer product, much in the way that Apple did. Apple stock used to be volatile until people realized that Apple's a part of everything they do all day long. And I think going through, owning MicroStrategy, certainly owning Stretch, their dividend paying product where they've stripped the volatility away from Bitcoin and are giving you an 11% yield. Like, that's kind of a game changer, right? Because if you're a person that's retiring, think about that. You could buy Stretch, get 11% yield on Stretch, pay a lot of your bills. Like, it revamps what you're, I have so many friends who are retiring. There's a ladies group that I'm a part of, and these women are like 65, 66, 67. And they're all very concerned over the money that they have coming in because they live on Social Security and they live on a fixed income. It's like when the people who actually are in charge of the capital that distributes these fixed income checks to these women, when these women start figuring out that they really need to demand that they have an allocation to Stretch at 11%, it makes everything a little more comfortable.
See that too. And, one last question before we wrap up, and I thank you again for all of your time today. If there's one thing you want policymakers, investors, or infrastructure builders to understand right now, what would that be?
I mean, I think this is the third time that I've said it, but, energy, everything good is downstream of energy. National security is three things. It's economic prosperity, diplomacy, and the military. Let's focus on economic prosperity within our towns. Let's focus on very myopic things. Let's keep people, living and building families and companies locally. You don't need to move to the West Coast or the East Coast anymore. There will be hopefully data centers in every town throughout America that's accretive to the people that live there. It gives you jobs. It gives you, job security. I think the best companies in the world are the ones that say, we want to build communities, not here's our product. Look what we built for you, right? Whatever it is that you build for your community.
I love it. I think that was the perfect ending. Lisa, this was such a powerful conversation. Thank you for taking that time.
I appreciate you, Jessica, always. Thanks for staying in touch and for inviting me. I'm excited for you guys and what the future brings for you all.
Same here. We're super excited. Lisa, thank you again. Appreciate it. Thank you.